It's been an extremely busy news day in the NHL. Tonight, we're taking a look at the possibility of the LA Kings looking at the Montreal Canadiens for some goaltending help. We've also had a trade today involving two former top 10 picks between Anaheim and Philly. We're going to examine that deal a little bit further and wondering if another young player in Anaheim might also be available for the right trade in the next little while. Plus, we also have a Habs prospect that would like a change of scenery or more of an opportunity to play. We're going to analyze the other big news today as well, the William Nylander contract extension and how that's going to impact the future of a few other pending free agent wingers and centermen around the NHL looking for comparable contracts. All that plus news from the waiver wire coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, it's been a very busy NHL news day. We kind of expected the William Nylander contract extension news would likely come today. We did not see there being a substantial, what I'd call a blockbuster trade amongst two former top 10 picks here in the last couple of drafts. We'll get into all that here in just a minute, but wow, there's other dedicated videos here on the channel regarding both of those scenarios. If you like a little bit more of an in-depth analysis on the reaction to the news itself, now we're going to kind of take a step further in each of those scenarios and just kind of analyze how they're going to be impacting other aspects of the league and other players around the league. So let's first start with news from the NHL waiver wire before we get into the bigger stories. For a few other quick notes here, the Calgary Flames today announced a couple of roster moves today, placing Kevin Rooney on waivers. Of course, he's been rehabbing an injury, needs to go down to the minors, ideally to get some playing time before he can ideally play in the NHL, just to see where things are at. The Calgary Flames also today assigned Jacob Peltier to the AHL Calgary Wranglers as well. Peltier has been out all season with a shoulder injury, so Rooney and Peltier have been rehabbing together. The goal here is to get both of these players to the minor leagues to be able to play and hopefully come back up to have a contribution and impact on the NHL roster a little bit down the road. Now, Kevin Rooney wouldn't be completely shocking if he's picked up by a team like Chicago or something. Obviously, the Blackhawks are completely ravaged with injuries, although they may not pick Rooney up because it'd probably be a little bit before he'll play NHL games, but be interesting to see what happens there. But a few roster moves in Calgary. The Minnesota Wild today announced that they've reassigned forward Jake Lucchini back to the American Hockey League. The Seattle Kraken today also brought back Riker Evans for another stint here in the NHL, and the Tampa Bay Lightning have also announced that Tanner Jeannot has sustained a significant injury and is going to be out for, they're calling it week to week, but it's expected to be multiple weeks here. Good little stretch of time that he's going to miss. So certainly not good news in Tampa. He certainly plays a key role there with the Lightning. They gave up a lot to get him, and he's missed a fair bit of time since he's joined the Lightning after coming over from the Nashville Predators. As I mentioned as well, we have a Habs prospect that would like a change of scenery. He's essentially requested a trade or more of an opportunity at the very least to play. We're talking about a little bit of an older prospect and defenseman, Nikolai Baudin. Now, Baudin was involved in a prospect trade between Montreal and Chicago back in October 2022. At one point, he was a first-round pick of Chicago, spent some time developing between going back to junior and then in the minor leagues with the Blackhawks. And eventually, I guess they traded him, I believe it was for Cam Hillis, so that they could get both guys into a new spot, see if a change of scenery would help and progress their careers. At this point, Baudin has not only not get an opportunity in Montreal, but he's not really getting a great opportunity with Laval in the American Hockey League either. They actually let him take a leave from the AHL team to join Team Canada to go over to the Spengler Cup over in Europe. Not long ago. He's back now, and obviously his camp is looking for a chance to play a more meaningful role. We do know the Montreal Canadiens have a lot of young defensemen, and it just looks to me that they're kind of prioritizing the younger D that they've drafted and developed over the ones like him that they've obviously picked up via trade. A little bit older, they may not see the upside like they do in their own guys that have been there a little bit longer, that they've spent more time with. Baudin's not an overly big guy, but at least when he was drafted, he was kind of viewed upon a pretty mobile, puck-moving guy who could put up some pretty good offensive numbers. Obviously, that hasn't quite developed the way everybody had planned, but we'll see. I don't really know with the amount of action he's seen and where he's at in his career if there's really going to be bunch of teams knocking down the door to get his services. Maybe he can go to another American Hockey League team at the very least that will have more of a need for him. We'll see if Ken Hughes and the Montreal Canadiens can do right by the player and try to find him a better opportunity. One other thing too as well regarding a UFA I want to talk about before we get into the other big news here. On the latest 32 Thoughts podcast, Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick obviously touched on a variety of topics that came out earlier today. But one thing that Friedman brought up at the Chicago Blackhawks, obviously talking about how they beat the Calgary Flames with basically an American Hockey League roster, and that they're missing so many players right now. It's insane. He wondered if they might call Phil Kessel. We know Phil Kessel wants to play. He does not want to go on a PTO, which is why he didn't go to training camp with anybody. There was believed to be PTO offers for Phil, and he would only go if he could be guaranteed a deal. That's not surprising from Phil Kessel in the least. But at this point, the belief is, the last we had heard, which was just a few weeks ago, the last time I heard any reporters kind of touch on Kessel and what they're hearing from his camp. And it sounds like he very much still wants to play. If he can get a contract for the rest of the year, I think he would do it. At this point, what Friedman's saying is essentially Kessel could come into the Blackhawks and play an important role. He could get, top 6 minutes probably. He could be a good leader, good veteran for them. And at this rate, there's enough time left in the season that they could sign him, even if they sign him for a fairly cheap contract the rest of the season. And if he can play a lot of minutes and a big role and put up some decent points, they could probably then flip him at the deadline. He could go for another Stanley Cup, and they could get some kind of asset in return. So it'd be like a free gimme, basically. I don't think they'd get a lot for him, but don't be surprised if you see Kyle Davidson and the Blackhawks reach out. They could use some veteran help there, especially with Foligno going to miss some time as well. So we'll see if that develops into anything. Now, of course, as I mentioned, we had a couple of big news items here today. One being the William Nylander contract extension. It's a done deal. $92 million over 8 years, 11.5 per season. There's $69 million in signing bonus money over that contract, $27 million paid out in salary. $27 million paid out in the first 2 years, not in salary. That is a lot of money. And it's obviously well earned. We know William Nylander's had a whale of a season, had a great season last year. I guess the concern, which is rightfully so, is this the peak? You don't want to reward a player with this mammoth contract and have the play continuously decline now, right? That's the concern. It's always a concern when you're getting guys on these types of deals. He's going to be 28 years old. This will take him to age 36. So he said, essentially, the quote from him was, "This is home. It's where he wants to stay." And he said it's his ultimate dream to win a Stanley Cup in Toronto. So saying all the right things, we knew that he was very interested in staying, but he wasn't going to take a discount. That was the word out of all the NHL insiders since the summer, was that Nylander loves Toronto. He's certainly a great fit there. He had a tremendous year last year. He took it, even though at the time it might not have felt like a discount in the beginning, by the end and by now, that contract is a big discount for the last couple of years. And he was in a predicament where Matthews and Marner were already signed, and, he probably wanted more money than what he got. And, at the end of the day, he feels like he's already given him a discount. He wasn't doing it again, and he did not, and he got paid. He got the bag, and it's just that simple, but it's well-deserved. So we'll see how the Leafs navigate the salary cap situation. But the big thing that I want to take a look at now is how that impacts others. I mean, for one, you've got Mitch Marner in not too distant future here, in 6 months' time. When we get to July 1st, he's up next. How is this going to impact him? Some people think Marner's going to get squeezed. After giving the bag to Nylander, they signed Matthews. They still have Tavares for another year. That Marner might not get that $13 million. And, Friedman said as well that during the offseason, when they tried negotiating with Nylander in his camp and they were getting nowhere, he was willing to bet on himself, and he had his number. And if they weren't near it, like they were trying to get him to sign under $9 million, they're like, nope, not doing it. That they did explore trading him, and they were looking for a stud defenseman, and they'd had some conversations, but nothing was on the table. that was worth it. Not that teams don't like Nylander. I think a lot of teams would have loved to have traded for him. They just never got, to the point where they, never got serious, because nobody ever really put a big enough name on the table that they would be like, okay, maybe we have to look at this. But they were willing to consider it if the right, mega deal was coming back. Never happened. So we'll see what happens with Mitch Marner, but this is going to have a big impact on him for sure. You got to think Elias Pettersson in Vancouver is looking at this, of course. I mean, Pettersson plays center. Nylander does not. Obviously, there's lots of other similarities to them now. And at this point, we know that Pettersson, Friedman actually touched on it again, saying that at this point, the Canucks and Pettersson are not talking contract because Pettersson is not ready. He's made it perfectly clear that even as of right now still, he's not ready. So I'm not sure what it's going to take. I can understand why it would make people nervous that he may up to leave. And there was a whole rumor about Chicago and him and Nylander joining forces with Bedard. Obviously, that's not true. At least part of it isn't true. You never know about Pettersson until he signs. It's hard to say 100% it's not true. But, I do understand the concern. But this is going to be impactful on him. But he's going to be an RFA. So Vancouver's not at all lost on that, and I think they're willing to pony up and pay him. The other player that I think it impacts a lot, that I think we'll see a little bit more of an immediate impact, is Jake Gensel in Pittsburgh. Jake Gensel, of course, similar age, similar production, not putting up quite the playmaking, assists and points that Nylander is right now, but he's scored 40 goals multiple times. 35, 40 goals is like a gimme for him. High playoff performer, high scoring winger. Would he be $11.5 million? No, maybe not. But he's going to be up there. He's going to be getting a substantial raise if he goes to market over what he's earning today. We know the Penguins are certainly not guaranteed for playoffs, but at the same time, they're not super far out of it either. They are basically a 3 or 4 game winning streak from being right in it. Being right up, back into not only in the mix, but like in the mix for maybe even getting into the top 3 in their division, or a 3 or 4 game losing streak from really starting to fall out. I think the next 2-3 weeks is going to be very telling into what direction this team goes. By the time we get to early February, we'll probably have a better idea. In that last month leading into March, Dubas is going to have some tough choices to make. As I mentioned before, there will be no shortage of interest in Jake Gensel. We've mentioned a high interest from the Vancouver Canucks. Jim Rutherford knows this player very well and would love to reward his team after a great start to the season with another weapon going into the playoffs. He'd love to get Gensel in Vancouver, no doubt. Now, of course, Sidney Crosby, who Gensel has played a ton with and has, obviously had a lot of success together, he's not going to want Gensel to go, and he's going to have some influence here too. So we'll have to wait and see where this goes. But this Nylander contract will have direct impact on these players, and the one that we'll probably see the most, coming up next year, so to speak, is Jake Gensel. Considering decisions have to be made before the deadline. He might be looking at this and saying, geez, I'm going to probably be at least a $10 million player in free agency. As much as I love Pittsburgh, if they can only pay me 7 or 7.5 or something like that, that's a lot of money to leave on the table. So we'll see where that goes. And of course, the other huge news today was Cutter Gauthier, Jamie Drysdale swap, Philly and Anaheim. Didn't see that one coming at all. I guess there were a few telling signs that Cutter Gauthier may not want to be a Flyer, but Danny Briere spoke to the media. We did get a little bit more clarification after that news broke. Essentially here, Cutter Gauthier, when he was first drafted by the Flyers in 2022, his first comments were like, I was made to be a Flyer. Like, he plays a great style that team historically likes to play. I know one of the first podcasts I've seen him do, he talked about his first encounter with John Tortorella. Sounded like an awesome experience. I don't know what changed for him, but Danny Briere said that after he came back from the 2023 World Championships, they were informed that he did not want to be a Flyer and he wouldn't be signing. Of course, that would have been last spring. We know, but then Briere says that he's kind of changed his mind back and forth a few times. We know in the summertime, they wanted him to come to development camp, and he wouldn't go. Now, the Briere said they tried to keep it quiet because they said that they knew he was young, he was changing his mind back and forth, and if the news got out that he didn't want to be a Flyer and then he ended up changing and wanting to stay, it would be really tough for him to deal with the fans and the media, and they didn't want him to have to deal with that, so they tried to keep it hush-hush until something like this had to come to be. So at the end of the day, something between his original draft and the World Championships completely changed his mind. I will say this, there is clips of him saying that he grew up being a fan of the Pittsburgh Penguins and that being drafted up by the Flyers was not going to go over well with like friends, family, etc. So I don't know if he was just grew up a Penguins fan and just couldn't do it. I mean, I know as a kid when you're cheering, like you do learn to hate the teams that your favorite team is rivals with, and maybe he just couldn't do it. I don't know, but at the end of the day, you got to be a pro and look at what's best for your career, which obviously is what he's doing. But he wouldn't even speak to the Flyers. I guess they tried. So you go back here, like Kim's back from World Championships. They get the stunning information he doesn't want to be a Flyer anymore, and then wouldn't show up for development camp, even though they really want him to come. And then kind of went back and forth a little bit. And then they tried to meet with him, and I believe they even went over to try to see him at the World Juniors. And he wouldn't even talk to them, wouldn't even let them explain what their plans are to kind of convince them to stay. So clearly he wanted out of there. So they felt like they had no choice, and they've been talking to teams for a while, just keeping it hush hush. And when they came across this deal with the Ducks for Drysdale and a pick, that they felt they need to take it. Now, Anaheim, on the other hand, I was a little confused. I mean, I thought they loved Drysdale. They have some other young D like Mintyukov, Zellweger, Luno, So maybe they felt like he was disposable for the right piece. And obviously, Cutter Gauthier is a big piece. But, I mean, he's a winger and a center. I don't know what it'll be at the NHL. They have Mason McTavish. They have Leo Carlson. They have some solid talent there. Makes me wonder about the future of Trevor Zegras. Zegras and Drysdale were like best buddies. Around the same age, just a few years older than this new crop that's coming in. And they had a really tough negotiation this past summer with Zegras being an RFA. And there was some talk and some concern about, is Zegras going to be a long-term Duck? And as they acquire all this other young talent, not that you can't or don't need more players, because you do. But again, they're going to have another top pick this year in the top probably 5 or 6 spots. So they're going to get another young piece. I just really wonder if they're willing to trade Drysdale. You have to think they'd probably be willing to trade Zegras. I mean, in the summertime when the negotiation was getting contentious, I didn't really hear anything that they were close to a trade or anything like that. But there was some talk that things were tense and, some unhappy sides here. And we know Pat Verbeek was trained by Steve Yzerman, runs a really tough negotiation. And at the end of the day, I don't know how much that impacted the relationship. So we'll see. But I do wonder what could be next year for Anaheim is maybe moving Zegras for another piece. We'll see. No guarantee they do it. It just makes me think he's expendable based on how they feel about Drysdale and this other move. They may not have even thought about trading Drysdale. This is just something that kind of fell in their lap, and they felt like Gauthier was too good to pass up. Maybe. We'll see. But I do wonder about Zegras' future. And lastly, we know that the LA Kings, as we've talked about, are likely in the goalie market. Talbot's been good for them, but Copley's out for the year. They have David Riddick as the number 2 right now, come up as he was ideally the number 3 in the minors, so he's like an insurance policy. So he'll do short term, but with Copley being out all year, it's unlikely to me that they go through the rest of the year without getting some extra help here for Talbot. Obviously, the Kings have slowed down a bit lately. They could use a little bit of a jolt. They do have a little bit of cap space. They have over $3 million in space right now. Plus, if they make it a trade and they move out a contract, it could create more real easy. And TVA Sports out of Quebec is wondering if they would have interest in Montreal's Jake Allen. Certainly, Jake Allen could be a great tandem with Talbot. Lots of experience, Stanley Cup to his name. He'd be a great fit in a bunch of places, but certainly LA is an interesting potential landing spot for him. I don't know what the deal would consist of if it happened. We don't really know what Montreal is looking for in return. Most likely looking for some good-looking prospects, and LA would have lots of those that they might like. Lots that we probably would see Ken Hughes be quite familiar with, that would have played in the Northeast where he spent a lot of his time. So at the end of the day, Jake Allen to the Kings does make some sense, but at the same time, Jake Allen does have some trade protection, and I don't know which teams he has on his no trade list. He has a young family. Montreal's pretty close to his hometown here in New Brunswick too. I don't know that he would really want to go all the way to California, but at the same time, he can only block so many teams, and I don't know who he has blocked on his list. So we'll have to wait and see, but it does, just from a business perspective, make some sense. So let me know your thoughts on all today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around so you don't miss any of the news around all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.